and welcome to the drama story. Valerie sacrificing everything for her family only to face betrayal and exploitation. She finally takes a stand. Says firm boldly. At what happens next will change everything. Stay tuned for the story.
My name is Valerie, but my absolute limit was permanently shattered by a single text message appearing on my screen. I had just finished processing the final medical payment for my young niece when my brother-in-law sent a message explicitly banning me from her hospital discharge dinner. He formally stated that they wanted to keep the upcoming celebration strictly limited to immediate family members only. The sheer audacity of those specific words hit me incredibly hard because my social media feed also displayed their recent post, flaunting a luxurious vacation in Hawaii. They were actively enjoying a tropical resort, while I was quietly draining my personal accounts to cover the $6,800 orthopedic surgery their daughter desperately needed. A crushing realization instantly washed over me that I had never truly been considered a respected part of their family circle. I was nothing more than a convenient financial tool they could easily exploit during a crisis before carelessly discarding me the moment my usefulness expired. I completely refused to let my overwhelming anger reduce me to useless tears or emotional arguments they would inevitably twist against me. Instead, I chose to execute a meticulously calculated response using the exact financial leverage they had so arrogantly taken for granted to fund their lavish lifestyle. If you have ever sacrificed everything for ungrateful relatives, only to be cruelly excluded when the storm finally passed, make sure to subscribe to the Revenge Mode channel right now. Stay tuned to see exactly how I turn their ultimate betrayal into a devastating financial lesson they will never be able to forget. Placing my mobile device face down on the smooth wooden surface of my home office desk, I immediately booted up my personal laptop and navigated straight into my secure online banking portal. The glowing monitor illuminated the quiet room as I mentally prepared to confront the harsh financial reality surrounding my sister Sabrina and my brother-in-law Marcus. I specifically needed to review the extensive history of massive medical payments I had consistently authorized on behalf of my 7-year-old niece Sophie, who urgently required a series of complex orthopedic surgeries to correct a severe congenital hip condition. Accessing the archived digital statements from the past few years felt exactly like opening a meticulously documented diary detailing my own foolish generosity alongside their escalating greed. I scrolled slowly back through the records to the very first time I offered to cover the steep hospital bills, when the initial medical diagnosis completely blindsided their household. During that particularly vulnerable period, they had been overflowing with genuine tears of relief and endless expressions of profound appreciation for my sudden financial rescue. I distinctly remember Sabrina hugging me tightly in the hospital corridor while sobbing about how she could never adequately repay my kindness, while Marcus had firmly shaken my hand, promising to eventually reimburse every single cent once his struggling freelance business finally stabilized. However, clicking through the subsequent months of automated bank transfers revealed a deeply disturbing psychological shift in their overall attitude toward my ongoing contributions to their daughter's health. As the vital orthopedic treatments became a regular monthly routine rather than an unexpected emergency, their initial profound gratitude rapidly dissolved into a silent expectation of my continuous monetary support. The heartfelt messages of appreciation slowly dwindled until they completely disappeared from our communications, eventually being replaced by casual forwarded emails from the pediatric billing department, containing brief instructions telling me the next heavy installment was currently due. They had fully transitioned from viewing my financial assistance as a generous familial lifeline to treating it as my mandatory permanent obligation, simply because I earned a stable, lucrative salary as a certified public accountant. They somehow convinced themselves that my financial independence automatically meant I should subsidize their entire existence without ever receiving basic respect in return. This toxic delusion of entitlement was heavily fueled by the constant interference of Marcus's mother, Patricia, who actively encouraged their incredibly reckless spending habits without ever contributing to the actual medical necessities. Patricia was an affluent widow who frequently materialized during holidays with extravagantly expensive gifts, deliberately designed to relentlessly flatter her son while completely ignoring their underlying financial instability. She intentionally fostered a superficial environment where they felt perfectly justified in maintaining a luxurious outward appearance, funding their lavish tropical vacations and purchasing designer accessories, while conveniently pushing the crushing weight of their actual parental responsibilities onto my shoulders. Her shallow generosity effectively shielded them from the harsh reality of their own poor choices, while simultaneously positioning me as the invisible workhorse expected to quietly fund their survival in the background. Staring at the undeniable numeric proof of their exploitation displayed across my monitor, I systematically began downloading every single relevant document into a secure, dedicated folder on my desktop. I diligently compiled dozens of itemized hospital invoices alongside the corresponding bank transfer confirmations to create an impenetrable wall of factual evidence that no amount of typical emotional manipulation could ever possibly breach. Printing these damning pages out one by one using my home office printer, I carefully arranged the thick stack of papers into a comprehensive physical portfolio representing tens of thousands of dollars in completely unappreciated sacrifices. I was meticulously preparing the groundwork for a definitive face-to-face confrontation, built entirely on irrefutable financial facts, to permanently terminate this toxic cycle of blatant familial exploitation once and for all. I purposefully placed the massive stack of printed evidence inside a bright red folder, knowing exactly how I would use these undeniable numbers to shatter their carefully constructed illusion of independence during our upcoming meeting. At exactly 8 o'clock the following Monday morning, I arrived directly at the main billing department inside the Central Seattle Hospital to execute the very first phase of my retaliation plan. I approached the reception window with absolute determination to permanently remove my personal credit card information from their automated payment database. For the past 2 years, my banking account had been the primary source of funding for every single medical procedure, without question or hesitation. Standing in front of the administrative desk felt incredibly empowering as I prepared to sever the financial pipeline that had comfortably sustained their arrogant lifestyle. The administrative clerk greeted me politely before pulling up the extensive medical profile detailing the upcoming orthopedic treatment scheduled for Sophie. I presented my identification documents before explaining my explicit intention to completely detach myself from the patient's ongoing financial file. I firmly requested the necessary legal paperwork to officially terminate my long-standing status as the designated financial guarantor for all future medical services. The hospital clerk handed me a detailed declaration form requiring my physical signature to formally decline any further financial responsibility regarding the upcoming $6,800 surgical procedure. I carefully filled out every required section using a blue pen to ensure there would be zero ambiguity regarding my absolute withdrawal from their billing ecosystem. I specifically instructed the billing department to legally transfer the entire outstanding balance, along with all future medical invoices, directly to Marcus's verified residential address. It was absolutely crucial to establish a concrete institutional paper trail, proving they were now solely liable for the massive expenses they had comfortably ignored for so long. I want to officially confirm one last time that starting today, any medical expenses incurred under Sophie's name will be sent directly to her biological parents' address. I stated clearly to the highly attentive hospital employee. While the clerk diligently processed the updated documents through the hospital server, I pulled out my mobile phone to draft a formal electronic mail explicitly addressed to both Marcus and Sabrina. The message contained a highly professional notification detailing my immediate resignation as their private medical sponsor effective immediately. I deliberately maintained a cold, corporate tone throughout the message to completely eliminate any possibility of emotional manipulation or misinterpretation regarding my final decision. The email clearly stipulated that my previous financial contributions were voluntary gifts that had officially ceased due to their recent exclusionary behavior regarding family gatherings. I specifically attached the latest billing statements to the electronic message so they could clearly see the exact numerical value of the heavy burden they now inherited. Sending this digital written record was a calculated strategic maneuver designed to completely protect myself against any inevitable future accusations of abandoning them without proper prior warning. I pressed the send button with a profound sense of finality as the message simultaneously landed in both of their personal inboxes. We have fully updated the system across all clinical departments, Miss Valerie, so next month's comprehensive invoice will be entirely Mr. Marcus's responsibility. The clerk respectfully confirmed after typing continuously on her computer keyboard for several minutes. I sincerely thanked the hospital staff member for her highly efficient assistance before gathering my belongings and walking confidently toward the main exit doors. Stepping out into the bustling city streets brought a strangely profound sense of psychological relief that completely washed away the lingering bitterness from the previous weekend. I knew with absolute certainty that activating this specific financial leverage would directly strike the most vulnerable weakness of people who habitually survived by draining the hard-earned resources of others. By completely cutting off the endless flow of unearned money, I was finally forcing them to confront the terrifying reality of functioning as responsible, independent adults. There was no longer any protective safety net available to catch them when their carefully maintained illusion of wealth inevitably crashed into the unforgiving wall of actual parental obligations. Around noon on Wednesday of that exact same week, I visited a familiar coffee shop located right next to my corporate office building to meet with my best friend, Cynthia. I desperately needed an objective external perspective, so I presented the entire frustrating sequence of recent events to her while carefully omitting excessive emotional complaints. I wanted to firmly validate my internal boundaries after experiencing such profound disrespect from people I had generously supported. Cynthia listened intently without interrupting before immediately affirming my growing suspicions regarding the blatantly exploitative nature of my current family dynamic. She explicitly pointed out that my continuous financial contributions had completely shielded them from facing any real adult responsibilities over the past several years. She emphasized that my unyielding generosity had effectively enabled their reckless behavior by constantly protecting them from the natural repercussions of their terrible financial choices. You have played the convenient role of an endless open wallet for far too long now, Valerie, so it is definitively time to let them carry the heavy consequences of their own hollow vanity, Cynthia stated resolutely while methodically stirring her cup of hot black coffee. Returning to the quiet sanctuary of my apartment later that evening, I dedicated several uninterrupted hours to finalizing the meticulous preparation of my undeniable physical evidence. I carefully printed out every single pertinent bank statement alongside the corresponding itemized hospital invoices, proving my extensive monetary involvement. I then systematically arranged these critical documents in strict chronological order to prevent any possible chronological disputes during our impending conversation. I secured these thick stacks of paper inside several bright red file folders that were clearly labeled with dates and exact monetary figures for maximum psychological impact. I wanted absolutely no room for their typical defensive deflections or manipulative excuses when the undeniable numerical facts were finally presented directly to their faces. With the undeniable paper trail finally organized perfectly on my desk, I composed a highly calculated text message directed to Sabrina's personal phone number. I specifically requested that both she and Marcus make a mandatory appearance at my private residence during the upcoming weekend. To ensure their prompt attendance without raising any immediate suspicions regarding my actual motives, I falsely claimed the meeting was strictly necessary to hand over all of Sophie's original medical records required for an upcoming clinical evaluation. I knew their inherent laziness would compel them to simply comply with my request, rather than attempting to gather the complex medical history themselves through official hospital channels. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated with a response that perfectly encapsulated her perpetually shallow and utterly dismissive worldview. Just have everything prepared beforehand, because we will quickly swing by to grab the paperwork before heading straight out to dinner since Marcus has been incredibly busy lately. Sabrina texted back with a casually callous attitude. Her brief message demonstrated zero genuine concern for her daughter's medical history, or any basic appreciation for my time, cementing my firm resolve to proceed with the ultimate financial cutoff. It was remarkably validating to see her true colors displayed so clearly right before I permanently closed the bank vault they had grown so accustomed to raiding. I spent the remainder of my Saturday morning deliberately transforming my living environment to suit the incredibly serious nature of our impending confrontation. I completely cleared off the large oak dining table situated right in the center of my spacious living room, removing any decorative items that might distract from the severe reality of the situation. The polished wooden surface was left entirely bare except for the strategically placed red folders containing the undeniable proof of their prolonged financial parasitism. I arranged 3 chairs in a highly formal configuration designed to instantly establish a cold atmosphere of absolute authority the moment they walked through my front door. I wanted them to immediately sense a distinct shift in the traditional family power dynamics before anyone even uttered a single syllable. By completely removing any welcoming elements from my personal space, I successfully engineered a highly intimidating corporate environment specifically tailored for the fierce showdown scheduled to occur later that afternoon. At exactly 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, the doorbell of my apartment rang with a series of sharp, continuous chimes. Marcus pushed his way into the foyer first while displaying his usual underlying arrogance, audibly sighing while obnoxiously rolling his eyes around my living room. He immediately began complaining bitterly about how this mandatory errand was completely ruining his precious weekend relaxation time. Sabrina strolled in right behind him, acting perfectly normal, as if that incredibly insulting text message excluding me from their celebration had never even existed. She completely ignored the obvious tension in the room by chattering endlessly about her upcoming personal shopping trips to various high-end designer boutiques downtown. "Where are the papers, Valerie? Because you need to hand them over quickly so we can leave. Considering I booked a table at an exclusive French restaurant that is incredibly difficult to reserve," Marcus urged with clear annoyance while aggressively tapping his expensive wristwatch. I deliberately refused to answer his arrogant demand, immediately choosing instead to maintain a calculated silence while maintaining direct eye contact with both of them. Moving with purposeful slowness, I walked directly over to the heavy wooden front door to firmly engage the solid metal deadbolt with a loud clicking sound. After securing the exit, I pivoted back toward the center of the room and slowly approached the oak dining table where my carefully organized financial dossiers were already waiting. "Just sit down calmly, Marcus, because the specific items I am about to hand over to both of you today are vastly more important than your fancy French dinner," I instructed with a razor-sharp tone while pointing firmly toward the 2 empty chairs positioned opposite my seat. The perpetual smugness plastered across both of their faces began to visibly falter the exact moment they actually registered the sheer physical thickness of the red folders resting on the table. They had clearly arrived expecting to quickly grab a few thin sheets of standard pediatric checkup forms, making the imposing stacks of financial documents a highly disturbing surprise. Sabrina momentarily stopped talking about her luxurious weekend itinerary, her gaze dropping down to the meticulously categorized paperwork that clearly resembled serious legal portfolios rather than simple hospital records. She awkwardly shifted her brand new designer handbag from one shoulder to the other, perhaps subconsciously recognizing that the current atmosphere felt disturbingly reminiscent of a formal corporate interrogation rather than a casual familial visit. Marcus stubbornly refused to sit down, initially crossing his arms over his chest, while projecting an exaggerated posture of defensive impatience to mask his sudden underlying uncertainty. He let out another loud sigh of frustration, while muttering something under his breath about people who constantly try to manufacture unnecessary drama out of completely straightforward administrative tasks. I simply remained standing behind my designated chair, without saying another word, allowing the suffocating silence in the room to slowly amplify their growing psychological discomfort. It was incredibly satisfying to watch their deeply ingrained sense of superiority slowly evaporate as they finally realized they were no longer dealing with the endlessly accommodating relative they had successfully exploited for years. Reluctantly recognizing that I possessed absolutely no intention of unlocking that front door until they complied, Marcus aggressively pulled out the wooden chair and practically threw his heavy body onto the seat. Sabrina cautiously followed his lead by taking the adjacent seat, sitting nervously on the very edge of the cushion, while keeping her expensive purse tightly clutched against her lap like a protective shield. Once they were both fully seated, I took my own place on the opposite side of the table, establishing a clear physical boundary between us that perfectly mirrored the emotional wall I had permanently erected. I placed my hands flat on either side of the primary red folder, feeling the smooth texture of the cardboard containing the definitive numerical proof of their staggering financial parasitism. This was the exact precise moment I had been meticulously preparing for all week, the crucial turning point where their carefully constructed reality of consequence-free living was about to collide violently with undeniable factual accounting. Exactly 15 minutes after the heavy front door securely locked into place, the previously casual atmosphere inside my living room completely transformed into something suffocatingly tense. I reached across the smooth wooden table surface to deliberately push the freshly printed $6,800 medical invoice directly toward Marcus. The official document clearly displayed his full legal name, boldly printed under the designated section for the primary financial guarantor, responsible for the upcoming surgical procedure. I explicitly demanded that he physically pick up the hospital paperwork to read the newly updated billing information aloud for everyone in the room to hear clearly. His confidently relaxed posture immediately crumbled the exact second his eyes scanned the official hospital letterhead, confirming that my personal credit card had been permanently removed from their automated system. He swallowed hard while staring blankly at the massive numerical figure that now legally belonged to his personal credit profile. I maintained absolute unwavering eye contact while formally declaring the permanent termination of any future financial subsidies regarding their household expenses or upcoming medical treatments. I meticulously outlined exactly how they had systematically exploited my personal bank accounts for multiple years, while treating my massive monetary contributions with unapologetic entitlement. You explicitly decided that I was not a respected member of your family, so I simply ensured that my hard-earned money no longer belongs to your family either. I articulated each word with razor-sharp clarity while staring directly into his increasingly panicked eyes. The absolute, undeniable finality in my speaking voice left zero room for misinterpretation regarding the permanent boundary I had just established to protect my ongoing financial independence. Instead of demonstrating any genuine remorse for his incredibly insulting behavior over the past weekend, Marcus immediately resorted to aggressively raising his voice in a desperate attempt to regain control. He loudly attempted to justify their endless financial parasitism by absurdly arguing that continuously funding Sophie was the natural blood obligation of a highly successful relative. He actually possessed the sheer audacity to frame my previous generosity as a mandatory familial duty rather than an extraordinary voluntary sacrifice that they had completely squandered. His raised volume merely echoed uselessly against the undeniable stack of numerical evidence resting between us, perfectly highlighting his complete inability to comprehend basic gratitude or personal accountability. I simply allowed him to exhaust his ridiculous defensive arguments without offering any verbal interruption to validate his escalating anger or his pathetic attempts at shifting the blame. Seeing her husband completely failing to successfully intimidate me into submission, Sabrina immediately switched tactics by rapidly deploying her signature strategy of intense emotional manipulation. "You are truly a cold-blooded monster, Valerie. Are you seriously going to abandon your own niece's physical health simply because your personal ego was slightly bruised?" Sabrina cried out while squeezing out several highly unconvincing fake tears to emphasize her manufactured outrage. Rather than engaging with her transparent theatrical performance, or attempting to defend my basic morality, I forcefully slammed my open palm down onto the thickest red folder containing dozens of previous payment receipts. The loud slapping sound echoing through the room immediately silenced her dramatic sobbing, while simultaneously drawing their undivided attention back to the massive pile of physical evidence. I loudly reminded them that the tens of thousands of dollars meticulously documented inside that specific folder represented actual sacrifices they had entirely taken for granted while enjoying their luxury vacations. I firmly established my absolute ownership over my own resources, definitively shattering her pathetic attempt to weaponize my genuine love for Sophie against my own long-term financial stability. They were finally forced to sit in absolute silence while staring helplessly at the monumental medical debt they now carried entirely on their own unprepared shoulders. At exactly 4 o'clock that same afternoon, a completely panicked silence began enveloping the two individuals who had swaggered so arrogantly into my apartment just moments earlier. Marcus meticulously read through the strict payment terms prominently printed on the official hospital invoice before a terrifying realization visibly washed over his increasingly pale face. He suddenly understood with absolute clarity that he simply did not possess enough liquid cash across all his personal accounts to cover this mandatory $6,800 medical fee due by next week. His previously unshakable, arrogant demeanor instantaneously crumbled into pathetic desperation as the severe real-world consequences finally penetrated his thick skull. He acutely recognized that failing to submit this massive payment by the required deadline would severely damage his fragile credit score, while simultaneously destroying his already struggling freelance business operations, leaving him completely unable to secure any future commercial loans. The undeniable reality of his impending financial ruin completely stripped away the manufactured illusion of wealthy independence he had worked so hard to project for years, exposing him as nothing more than a desperate fraud. "Valerie, can we please just slow down and discuss this rationally, because my company is currently experiencing some severe cash flow issues this month, making it entirely impossible for me to shoulder this immediate burden," Marcus suddenly begged in a remarkably lowered voice that completely failed to hide his pathetic trembling. His sudden display of absolute submission stood in sharp contrast to the aggressive demands he had been shouting just 10 minutes prior, proving that his pride was entirely dependent on my endless financial subsidies. Sabrina immediately ceased her manufactured theatrical crying upon hearing his humiliating financial admission, sharply turning her furious attention directly toward her increasingly desperate husband. She viciously began blaming him for recklessly sending that incredibly stupid exclusionary text message in the first place, instantly igniting a bitterly pathetic internal argument right inside my living room. She shrieked about how his fragile ego combined with his desperate need to impress his wealthy mother had ultimately cost them their most reliable source of free income. Marcus aggressively fired back by loudly criticizing her endless luxury shopping sprees, alongside her complete refusal to secure a stable job to support their own daughter's basic medical requirements. They aggressively traded vicious insults while completely ignoring the massive medical debt resting on the table between them, desperately trying to deflect the crushing responsibility onto each other instead of accepting their own collective failures as parents. Watching them savagely tear each other apart over a situation they had entirely created themselves completely solidified my absolute lack of sympathy for their current predicament, confirming that my decision to completely withdraw my financial support was the only logical course of action. This is absolutely not the appropriate time or place for you to argue with each other, Sabrina. So both of you need to gather this entire pile of medical bills and finally teach yourselves how to actually function as responsible parents. I stated with icy detachment while calmly collecting their untouched water glasses from the dining table. I gestured firmly toward the unlocked front door without showing even a single microscopic fraction of hesitation, effectively signaling that our meeting had officially concluded permanently. They both scrambled awkwardly to collect the thick red folders filled with their newly inherited financial obligations, frantically stuffing the loose billing statements into Sabrina's expensive designer handbag, while their previous confidence was entirely replaced by an overwhelming sense of immediate panic. Watching the two of them clumsily gather the heavy stacks of debt-laden paperwork before hastily retreating through the doorway provided a profoundly clarifying moment for my own psychological peace of mind. I finally realized that permanently severing their unearned financial lifeline directly at the root constituted the most devastatingly effective psychological and financial punishment imaginable for people who exclusively survive on sheer entitlement. They were finally walking out into the unforgiving real world completely unprotected, forced to immediately carry the exact same heavy monetary burdens they had comfortably dumped onto my shoulders for the past 2 years. Exactly 30 days following that incredibly tense confrontation inside my living room, undeniably clear information regarding their rapidly crumbling financial stability began reaching my ears through mutual acquaintances. The severe real-world consequences of their ungrateful behavior had finally manifested in ways they could no longer successfully ignore or manipulate with fake tears. Marcus was ultimately forced to reluctantly liquidate his excessively expensive sports utility vehicle to generate enough immediate cash to satisfy the relentless hospital billing department. He desperately needed to cover that massive medical invoice before the strict deadline to salvage his fragile credit score from plunging into an absolutely unrecoverable financial disaster. The humiliating loss of his primary status symbol visibly destroyed his inflated ego while exposing his underlying inability to properly provide for his own daughter. Sabrina simultaneously had to permanently eliminate all of her frivolous luxury shopping habits, while completely canceling any upcoming tropical vacation plans she had previously boasted about online. She even had to actively seek out a grueling part-time employment opportunity at a local retail store just to help manage their rapidly accumulating credit card debt without relying on my wallet. Sabrina actually attempted to send me several lengthy text messages expressing her supposed remorse while desperately begging to rebuild our completely shattered relationship. I fully recognized that these pathetic apologies arrived far too late to carry any genuine meaning, prompting me to permanently block her phone number to maintain an absolute protective distance around my peaceful life. Stepping away from their endless toxicity finally provided me with the immense psychological clarity required to focus entirely on my own personal happiness without carrying their heavy burdens. Looking back at this entirely exhausting ordeal, this harsh narrative has cemented several undeniable truths regarding the profound value of self respect within blood relationships. Unconditional generosity sustained over a lengthy period of time inevitably transforms into toxic reliance before ultimately mutating into completely ruthless ingratitude. You possess absolutely no obligation to utilize your hard-earned financial foundation to purchase a respected position within your own family circle. Severing all supportive ties to habitual users does not constitute an act of selfishness, but rather represents the ultimate form of self-preservation, while forcing them to finally mature independently. Representing the Revenge Mode channel, we firmly present this narrative as an educational tool, demonstrating the critical importance of maintaining strict personal boundaries. We aim to inspire viewers to handle severe family crises using pure logical reasoning, alongside protective legal mechanisms, instead of yielding to emotional manipulation. Objectively evaluating this entire situation, Valerie demonstrated remarkable strength by decisively implementing a total financial cutoff to protect her own well-being. By utilizing undeniable factual evidence to permanently sever those toxic ties, she forced the ungrateful antagonists to inevitably suffer the devastating but entirely deserved consequences resulting directly from their own remarkably selfish decisions. Setting absolute financial boundaries remains the most effective method to permanently expose selfish individuals who exclusively value your personal presence for your continuous monetary contributions. Unconditional generosity without demanding fundamental mutual respect eventually breeds severe entitlement, proving that you must deliberately withdraw your financial support the exact moment your basic human dignity becomes compromised by ungrateful relatives. Walking away from a highly toxic family dynamic requires immense emotional courage, firmly demonstrating that prioritizing your own psychological stability is always vastly superior to purchasing a fake position within a deeply manipulative household. Refusing to silently tolerate blatant disrespect effectively forces those entitled dependents to finally confront the incredibly harsh realities of mature adulthood without utilizing your hard-earned resources. We send our deepest gratitude to the dedicated Revenge Mode audience for patiently following this intense journey regarding personal justice until the very concluding moments. Your continuous viewing support remains our absolute greatest daily motivation for producing this psychological educational content. Please share your honest perspectives in the comments section detailing exactly how you would personally handle entitled relatives demanding your money while completely disrespecting your boundaries.
Câu chuyện trên hoàn toàn là hư cấu, được kể ở ngôi thứ ba nhằm phản ánh vấn đề ranh giới tài chính trong gia đình. Nhân vật Valerie ban đầu giúp đỡ em gái và em rể vì tình thân, nhưng dần bị xem như nguồn tiền mặc định. Trong khi đó, Marcus và Sabrina lại sống xa hoa, né tránh trách nhiệm làm cha mẹ. Cao trào là khi Valerie dứt khoát cắt đứt hỗ trợ tài chính, buộc họ phải đối mặt với hóa đơn y tế mà trước đây họ phớt lờ. Phản ứng hoảng loạn và đổ lỗi lẫn nhau của họ cho thấy sự thiếu trách nhiệm và lòng biết ơn. Từ câu chuyện này có thể rút ra bài học: giúp đỡ không có giới hạn dễ bị lợi dụng, tiền bạc không nên thay thế trách nhiệm cá nhân, lòng tự trọng quan trọng hơn việc duy trì mối quan hệ độc hại. Bạn nghĩ Valerie làm vậy có quá cứng rắn không? Nếu là bạn, bạn sẽ tiếp tục giúp đỡ hay dừng lại? Hãy chia sẻ quan điểm của bạn nếu câu chuyện này chạm đến bạn, hoặc nếu bạn biết ai đó cần nghe điều này, hãy chia sẻ nó. Và cảm ơn bạn đã ở đây cùng tôi hôm nay. Hẹn gặp lại bạn trong câu chuyện tiếp theo. Hãy chăm sóc bản thân mình nhé.